Okay, well, welcome everyone. And just one quick note about the last module, Module 2. I had some correspondence with Andy, and Andy, I appreciate you bringing this up because it is important. One of the questions in the Module 2 quiz had to do with, what were the core motivations for why the British invested? And I suppose there could be a whole hierarchical categorization of motivations, but I want to make sure that everyone understands that there were at least 3, if not 4, motivations for why the British invested. Obviously, the big one was to make money, a return on investment. But in addition to that, there was an actual political strategy by the British government in concert with the kind of business elite to make sure that they were strategically investing for the purpose of securing food supplies for an increasingly industrialized urban society. And this would be analogous to what we see today. For example, in China, there is an actual governmental agency that has been set up there for the express purpose of investing in farmland in South America. Now, the United States are, for example, some of you who work, in full-time jobs and have a 401k or a 403b or whatever your retirement plan is, those stock funds oftentimes are invested in places like South America. And you could say that the reason why those investors are investing is to make money, but there is an effort in China, for instance, to strategically invest for the purpose of feeding their population. By analogy, the British government and their thought leaders, people like Richard Cobden, for instance, they really believe that it was important to strategically invest in American food supply systems, not just to make money, but also to have a source of food for a society that was becoming more and more urban. The other reason why they invested had everything to do with food prices. And this is something that we actually have going on in the United States today. If we were to, suddenly shut off imports of food, that could very well have an impact on our food prices. And we want to make sure that food prices are relatively low because that's what fuels economic growth in our current economic model. For instance, all of you who have smartphones, if suddenly tomorrow you had to pay 5 times the amount for food, you might not, have an iPhone, or you might, decide to do something different. So my thanks to Andy for bringing that up. By all means, the primary motivation why anyone would invest is a return on investment, but I do want to make sure that you guys understand there was also a strategic effort to do that and an effort to keep food prices low. Any questions or comments on that, guys? Or Andy?
I think the reason I picked that answer is because that's the one that I thought I could defend if it was the wrong answer.
Yeah, no, it's totally legitimate. And by the way, all of you, I love having correspondence with you. It's nice for those of you at Olathe, because I do see you, face to face, every 3 weeks or so. But many of the students, including those of you watching this online, you may have questions as well, and feel free to email me or even call me. All right. Well, let's move on to Module 3. This module does have an accompanying chapter. I think it's Chapter 4. Let me just double check. I think that's right. Yes. So it may be Chapters 3 and 4. But in any case, take a look at the reading list there in the module. And yeah, it's Chapter 4. So Katie and Cobus, who were Katie was a graduate student of mine, and Cobus was an undergraduate student of mine affiliated with the Frontier program. He was actually based in Wyoming. They authored most of this chapter. And this chapter is all about illustrating the vulnerability that we see in food processing, the produce sector, the dairy sector, and other kind of categories of production and processing in the U.S. Food system. So do make sure that you take the time to read this particular chapter. I like to think of the food and agriculture sector, including different commodity groups or subsectors. And there's a lot of confusion about this, unfortunately. And with the Department of Homeland Security, the official term is agriculture and food sector. So when you sort of think about, what is it that's considered the key infrastructure name for the food system, the best choice is actually the agriculture and food sector, okay? But all three of these, whether you're talking about the food industry, is it Michael?
Yeah.
Yeah, Michael, you work for Corbion, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so Corbion, I consider Corbion to be part of the food industry, right? But it's also, you could say, a key node or a key firm in the agriculture and food sector. And Corbion's producing all kinds of different commodities, right?
All kinds.
All kinds. And products, okay? The term agriculture and food sector, like I said, is the Department of Homeland Security designation. There are currently, I think, 15 CIKRs or SICRs, critical infrastructure and key resources. Everything from the cyber infrastructure of the United States to transportation systems, including airports, to the electrical grid, to water systems, to healthcare. All of these different domains of American society have been designated a critical infrastructure and key resource. And amongst those is the agriculture and food sector. Well, we look at subsectors underneath the agriculture and food sector in Chapter 4. The first is the most frequently cited example of what we would call food bioterrorism, okay? Katie does a really good job talking about this particular outbreak of salmonellosis. It happened in the Dalles, Oregon, in the 1980s. And basically what was going on is you had a cult called the Rajneesh cult that was trying to politically influence the city, a fairly small town, in an election, okay? And they thought if they could sicken enough people, then they could, kind of swing the vote. And it was really interesting because, we talk quite a bit, at least in my world of Homeland Security, we talk quite a bit about food bioterrorism, but really, a lot of that is because of kind of the post 9/11 preoccupation with terrorism, which is right to have. But it's interesting that the most frequently cited example of it actually predates 9/11. It was 1984 at a restaurant. You're going to look at what was one of the most just awful outbreaks of salmonellosis, Salmonella Tennessee, that happened in PCA peanut butter products about 10 years ago. And then another salmonellosis case in the produce sector, and initially incorrectly attributed to tomatoes, but involving jalapeno peppers and serrano peppers. And that one was actually a transnational event involving Mexico and the United States. Lately, in my own private research, I've been reading quite a bit about contamination in milk and dairy products, and there's a lot of legitimate microbial concerns, but the one that you'll read about in Chapter 4 is the chemical compound melamine. And if any of you are familiar with this, this is an example of what we call economically motivated adulteration, or EMA. And what was going on was the Chinese dairymen were getting a premium if their product met a certain metric on a protein test, looking for proteinaceous compounds in milk. And the assumption was that if you have more protein in your milk, it's a higher quality milk product. And motivated by economics, not so much by, say, what the Rajneesh cult was motivated by in Oregon in 1984, which was, outright malevolent political ends. In the case of China, the economic goal of getting a higher premium prompted a good number of these Chinese producers to put a compound that artificially elevated the protein scores of the milk tests, and that compound is melamine, which, unbeknownst to them, causes sickness in animals and humans. And that was an absolute disaster, and actually prompted a new overhaul of food safety legislation in China. In addition to those episodes, you will read one article from the Financial Times about Chipotle. No doubt you all are familiar with. A couple of years ago, there was a significant sanitation supply chain issue involving a pathogen, E. coli O26. And you'll read about that and just showing how vulnerable the retail sector is, particularly in this day and age of vertically integrated retail outfits like Chipotle. Looking to the future, I'll make some closing comments about food defense, which we don't really cover in depth in this course, although if any of you are interested in food defense, my colleague, Dr. Abby Nooch, teaches a course on it. Okay. By 2021, food facilities are going to be required to have a food defense plan, and we did this several years ago. Actually, Michael, you'll be interested. You may be familiar with the company Danisco, which is kind of a sister, not a sister, but I don't know. How would you characterize Danisco vis-a-vis Corbion?
I'm definitely not a sister, but probably a competitor.
Yeah, yeah. How about an enemy across the street? Is that more appropriate?
Yeah.
One of our Frontier students wrote up a food defense plan for Danisco. And this is before Danisco was bought out by DuPont. And that was a move prompted by pressure and encouragement from the food industry, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and the FDA, but also who else do you suppose, Josh or Tegan there, who else do you suppose would want a company to have a food defense plan? What are some other economic stakeholders?
The consumer?
Yeah, I don't think, well, maybe consumers, they indirectly perhaps. If you were going to drop a plan to secure, say, Michael's facility at Corbion, who would that please that Michael's facility interacts with?
The investors.
Okay, the investors are getting warmer. Good job. Is that Kostas?
Yeah.
Okay, and Andy, who else?
Their suppliers and consumers.
Yeah, so the suppliers might want it. Who else? What do you think, Michael?
Well, definitely, like he said, our suppliers, but also the people we sell our stuff to. Because particularly my plant, we make ingredients, so we're not making finished products. So,
what happens if things go wrong? What happens practically speaking?
Well, if something's go extremely wrong, there's a recall, so.
And what else?
Well, our stocks would go down.
And what else?
There'd be legal action.
Okay, let's talk about that. So who is interested in firms having food defense plans?
FDA and USDA.
Yes, indeed. But in addition to those governmental actors, in addition to, say, the investors, who else, in light of the potential threat of legal action, would want a food defense plan?
The company itself.
And
So they
who,
don't-
say again?
I said the company itself, so that they can be prepared for a legal action.
And who else? What do you think, Tegan? Starts with an I.
It ends with a,
And it ends with company or companies.
the people that are importing it.
Perhaps. I'm thinking of another economic stakeholder that has a particular interest if there was legal action.
Insurance companies.
Yes. Who said that? Josh? And tell me why an insurance company would want, say, Corbion or Danisco to have a food defense plan.
Well,
They're not willing to take the risk of insuring you if you don't have it in place.
Yeah. If you're positively speaking, let's think about it. If we're confident that Michael, say, in his Corbion facility, knows all the vulnerabilities, keeps the doors locked at night, knows who his employees are, has a process for vetting his employees, make sure that the incoming containers are secure and locked until the people who are supposed to unlock them do so. If there's a food defense plan, the insurance company is going to be much more confident, and therefore, what does that end up usually resulting in? Finance-wise.
Lower premiums for the
Yeah,
insurance.
exactly. Lower premiums. Keep in mind, who got nailed after 9/11? It was all the insurance companies who had insured the airline industry for these planes. Significant costs. Right now, what we're facing with the fallout from Hurricane Harvey in Houston, and then I haven't seen the weather forecast. Have you guys seen it for Florida? It's looking pretty ominous, right?
Supposed to hit Florida by Sunday.
By Sunday. And, insurance companies are primarily interested in hedging against risk and making judgment calls about risk tolerance. And a food defense plan is becoming more and more important, especially when you think about the fact that the FDA and the USDA, although they may require this, they can't actually be on site inspecting every single facility. The USDA can inspect all meat and poultry facilities, but the FDA does not have a large enough inspectorate to be able to be on site all the time, say in Corbion's facility or Danisco's facility. Okay.
what would a food defense plan encompass if it's something that's supplementary to what the USDA and FDA require already?
Yeah. So
And,
if
and the stuff that the specific facility requires in-house. safety-wise.
Yeah. I mean, again, if you're interested in this, and for someone like you, Josh, you may actually find this useful since you are looking to a career, in kind of the food safety and security world. Dr. Nuch's course on food defense covers much of this, but it's basically, it's kind of like taking it, you're familiar with HACCP?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a HACCP plan, but instead of it dealing with biological, chemical, and physical hazards that might happen in processing, it's looking at all of the potential criminal and vulnerable threats that are not the vulnerabilities to different kinds of threats, including intentional contamination, which is the big concern. Part of the reason why I had you guys look, I'm having you read about the melamine issue, which was economically motivated adulteration, as well as the 1984 event in Oregon, is that it shows how intentional contamination can happen, whether it's, regardless of how someone's motivated to do it, okay? And a food defense plan would think through all that could go wrong. For example, what happens if we have a disgruntled employee who wants to take it out on Corbion? By the way, I should probably stop using Corbion as the illustration here. Sorry, Michael. Okay. What do we do? For instance, my student, Scott, who now actually works right next to the Casey DeLatha building for a food safety research firm, when he wrote his food defense plan, one of the things they found was that the roof of these facilities had hatches that you could open, and because people assume, hey, it's on the top of the facility, surely no one's ever going to be up there. They discovered that they actually were not always being locked and secured, so that was a vulnerability. Thinking through that. Another one would be, what do we do when someone claims that they did something? So let's say that tomorrow Tegan gets this email saying, hey, all the food products that you guys are currently running sensory analysis tests on, I actually, on behalf of, ISIS, have contaminated that. How would Tegan, through a food defense plan, be able to show, well, actually, there's no way that could have happened because we had total custody of it. Your claim does not stack up. And it's really important because if you don't have a food defense plan, if you don't know the vulnerabilities, you don't show that you're managing them, then any claim, say you can imagine a claim against a McDonald's or Cargill or a big transnational food company, could have significant psychological and kind of retail reputation consequences. So it's like a HACCP plan, but dealing more with criminal security type concerns. And, I hope that you all can, enjoy reading some of these sort of narratives that Katie and Cobus wrote on the actual outbreaks. And then we're actually going to go, starting next week, I think, going in earnest into, or in 2 weeks' time, actually, going in earnest into the history narratives. That'll really be important for rounding out your understanding of the importance of cross-border cooperation. Okay, moving on. One of the challenges that is becoming more and more of a problem in the food industry worldwide is the issue of action feedback loops and never-ending stress on systems in the workplace. So I don't know about Corbion, but like a lot of these food ingredient companies they've got, they're basically producing and processing, if not 24 hours, say, 20 to 22 hours around the clock. And one of the challenges that you'll read about in chapter 4 is how can you give yourself the best possible chance to be a good decision maker in that kind of an environment? And it's not easy, because if there is a disruption in a system, say at point A, and you adjust the system to respond at point B, that may create other decision steps, or steps that require more decisions. And this is something that we cannot teach through just PowerPoint. It's the kind of thing that you have to learn by doing things like internships, capstones, actual workplace experience. And so I just want to encourage you to pay close attention, and I'll talk to you all in the final oral exam about it, but pay close attention to what Katie talks about regarding the complexity of the decision-making environment in the food industry. She cites action feedback loops as a piece of that complexity, but there's also things like time pressure. You know, for instance, if you're a plant manager, or even if you're a retail manager, you don't have the luxury of taking forever to make decisions about issues and concerns. You've got time pressure. There's also high stakes going on, meaning if Josh is running a food plant and he gets something wrong, does something incorrectly, there can actually be significant financial or even public health consequences to that. And so Katie has a narrative at the end of chapter 4 about the environment where many of you already work, many of you will end up working, and I want you to reflect on that. I think I've got one question in the quiz about it, but I will also dialogue with you in the final oral exam about it. And that's it for module 3. Next week, we will not convene as a class, but I will web post the recording from last semester for module 4. We'll look at the different facets of security. It's a guest lecture by Dr. Ackelson that we've previously recorded. Actually, no, many of you will get to meet Dr. Ackelson here in a few weeks. I've saved his comments for them, but there's a recording on the different facets of security that you'll just watch in your own time next week. Any questions, guys?
I guess I have kind of a one about the Chipotle break. I guess I was born in '91, so I don't have a good historical perspective on this kind of outbreak, but how did the Chipotle one kind of stack up comparatively to other ones in the retail world? Like sales wise and like how the company took a hit and whatnot.
Yeah.
This is probably one of the bigger ones. This one, and I guess as the Bluebell ice cream, that one was a big one too.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that have happened since I've been interested in this topic.
Yeah. Only because I'm a few years older than you, I can share a couple of other scenarios. One was Schwann's, I think in 1994. They had a contaminated ice cream distribution system that sickened a lot of people. And that was, I would say, Schwann still exists today. But if that was to happen again today, I think that I think Schwann's would look totally different. I personally think it's an absolute miracle that Chipotle has been able to recover as well as they have. And I think one of the reasons why they have been able to recover, and actually there's a K-State faculty member who is their chief scientific advisor, is that they did get out in front of it and start talking about it. And Chipotle, they glory in being kind of the, I don't know what you want to call it, more organic-esque retail option, but they really, to their doom, were not embracing a lot of the high-tech food safety related control interventions that we have that are mainstream in larger companies. And so they've been able to recover, but it was significant. You'll read about how many, places got shut down, and so I would classify the Chipotle one as kind of, medium level significant. Nothing, will ever be like, I think, the Jack in the Box outbreak of 1993. But Jack in the Box now is back, and I ate at one in St. Louis about a year ago, and there's a saying in food safety: never waste a good crisis. What that means is, if something bad does happen, make sure you take advantage of it, and in companies and even in regulatory approaches, deal with it. And we definitely have done that. I mean, there's new technologies that deal with E. coli 0157H7, and that can be directly attributed to the outbreak of E. coli 0157H7 from the Jack in the Box outbreak in 1993. So, yeah, but you'll definitely read about the Chipotle one in the Financial Times article.
I think one of the biggest things that I remember wasn't food related, but it was Tylenol. And there was a big tampering episode with Tylenol. And I think that's one of the first times they had a big corporate reaction to it that everybody replicates now.
Yeah, and I even remember when Girl Scout cookies had intentionally placed needles in the cookies. This was when I was a kid.
What?
But I was told they were not in the Thin Mint, so I thought I was okay. Yeah, and for those of you who take my other class, Trade and Agricultural Health, we camp out for a bit on the idea of, or the framework of, risk analysis. And risk analysis consists of risk assessment, risk management, and risk communication. And it's really important to have a risk analysis approach if you're a firm managing these outbreaks or these events, because part of the solution, whether it be like the Tylenol intentional contamination event, or Chipotle, or what happened with Jack in the Box, or even what China had to do in the wake of the melamine scare, is not only look at risk and assess it and not only manage it, but really actively communicate and talk about, hey, this is what we are doing to manage the risk. And that is so key now for legal reasons, for public relations reasons. Again, I would say that's the reason why Chipotle has been able to kind of survive, is that they did have a fairly robust communications plan. And no doubt the corporate system, their corporate system, is set up to do that, much more effectively, certainly than Jack in the Box was. Have there been any major events in the produce sector that you're aware of, Kostas?
I mean, with spinach, it's, I think, the biggest one, and then E. coli,
Yes.
cantaloupes, with microgreens, sprouts, not microgreens. Then one really big one with in Europe with frozen berries. There are a lot out there.
Yeah. Well, and the California, spinach companies that were at the center of the 2006 E. coli outbreak. Some of those, or at least one of them, I know does not exist anymore. And again, it goes back to, what are the insurance companies interested in? Because they're helping insure these companies against bad stuff happening. and lawsuits. So. Well, have fun reading, and I will not see you. Let me just double check here. I don't think I'm going to see you until September. Yeah, I will not see you until September the 20th. Okay? So, but you still need to log in and catch up on Module 4 next week regarding the multiple facets of security. All right?
See you later.
See you guys.
Thank you, Dr. Cassie.
Yeah.